Hello, good morning, everybody. Tara here with the Wifey Wake Up, No Makeup Again This Morning podcast. And today is a follow up to an earlier podcast about why husbands resist counseling. So this is part two. It's actually kind of part three. I've done basically three parts on this topic, but check out episode 59, 60, and then this is 62, and we'll all come together. I really try to keep these podcasts short, and the drawback is, however, that I don't always get to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. But the great thing is then you can check them out in more bite-sized pieces. So today is a follow-up and clarification on a few things, because where I left off last, you might be thinking, oh, great. Okay, so he doesn't want to go to counseling, so I just acquiesce to that and I just do my own thing and work on myself. I can do that. I've been doing that for years, and I'll just give it a try. And he's relieved because you're not asking him to go to counseling anymore. That is not the case. And I really want to clarify this because that could be just as not helpful as going to counseling and butting heads. So I want to clarify just real quick, the TLDR of this is I am for counseling, but you have to guide your counselor and let them know what your objectives are and what you want. And I'm absolutely for you have to continue communicating even if you're not going to counseling together. So that's the brief part of it. But hear me out. There's more to this that I think will be very, very helpful. So number one, whether you go to counseling or not, it's imperative that you do your best for the marriage, not simply what your personal desires are. I already said that before, but I want to iterate it again in this sense that when you are, let's say you've acquiesced to not going to counseling together, and you're going to, as I suggested in an early podcast, you're going to focus, just a moment. You're going to focus on figuring out what you can do to help improve the situation without necessarily going to counseling. That I want to clarify, that doesn't mean like, okay, great, I'm going to start my own personal journey and to go off in your own singular direction. And essentially kind of keep on going in the direction that you were already thinking. Now, mind you, I'm saying this from personal experience, right? This is 20 some years of marriage and having gone through some very rough patches in marriage. And so I'm not chiding you. I'm giving you the shortcut version and like just get to the solution. And here's how you can do it. And that is, yes, work on yourself, but with a mindset of what am I doing that's contributing to the problem and what can I do to overall help the situation? Because you can't make him do anything anyways, but what you can do is change yourself that can potentially and likely cause some reactions in him. And I'll tell you what, guys are pretty simple, thank God. And if you make a shift, they're consciously or subconsciously going to notice that something's changed, and they will likely shift as well. So you can actually impact a lot of change, cause a lot of change by just changing yourself. And so I am for counseling. Actually, after I decided to no longer push for counseling with my husband, I actually continued to go to counseling on my own, but there are very important points here. I made sure, first of all, that the counselor knew what my objectives were. So, for example, it might have been, my husband and I have been going through some rough patches lately, but I also know that I'm still dealing with grief from losing my entire family of origin. I'm also dealing with grief and frustration of my future not coming to fruition as I had envisioned it. I need to know how I can, first of all, manage those feelings that are going on within myself, and how I can participate in creating a future or accepting the future that is happening, is being created. Maybe I have to shift my vision and helping me to see my role and what I can do in this situation. Now that is a very personal statement that I would have said back in the day to a counselor, so they know what I want and what my objective is. And one more thing, I would have added, I love my husband and I want to stay married to him. I don't see anything toxic in the sense like emotional or physical abuse. And I want to stay in my marriage. So help me with these things. You have to put your counselor on a trajectory, let them know where you want to go. Otherwise, they will just follow you wherever you're going to go. And that's where you get the classic case of they're just collecting their weekly paycheck. And hopefully it can take a while to find a counselor. And thankfully, there's many wonderful online resources these days where you can kind of narrow down a good match for you. But it's important to let them know what your goals and objectives are and find the right counselor. Even though you direct a counselor, hopefully you'll still find someone that obviously if they see red flags, they're going to let you know and let you know honestly that, this is not a good relationship to be in. And that honestly is a bit of the luck of the draw. If you're feeling like I felt early on when we were going to marriage counseling and there were just some really off cues, and I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but it's worth mentioning again, that one of the counselors said, I just couldn't be married to your husband. That was totally inappropriate, and you have to even pay attention, unfortunately in a way, but you still had to pay attention to inappropriate cues by this person that you're hiring to help you. And it's just, that's just part of life. So keep your eyes and ears open. Let them know what your objectives are. And what I did is I didn't go in regularly. I went in for specific issues. So like particularly when I was really dealing with grief about losing my family of origin, I went in for several sessions kind of going through how do I manage these feelings? What are they telling me? And what I found out too is by addressing those types of issues or even my simultaneous grief of not seeing the future come to fruition for which I thought would come to fruition, is that the other issues in my marriage started to resolve as well as I resolved those other things that were going on for me. And so that's the key point that I really wanted to pass along, is that while in my last podcast, I did emphasize that I kind of went inwards and I didn't tell my husband all the things that I was fixing myself or this direction that I thought I would test to see, okay, he says he's not being heard in these counseling sessions or even by me. So I am going to get to the bottom of that and see, essentially I challenged myself to let's see if that's true. And basically, there's steel man and straw manning, right? And I thought, well, I'll try flipping the script and see how true that seems. And it was very true. So when I mean working on yourself, or if you take the same approach, be very careful that your goal is still focused on the betterment of the marriage and taking care of your other stuff on the side that may be impeding and getting in the way of your marriage. Now, of course, and I think it's atrocious in a way that I even have to say this, but of course, I'm not talking about relationships that really should be ended, right? Very emotional or physical abuse. I'm not talking about envisioning and keeping the marriage number one in relationships that are truly, as we say these days, toxic, right? And that should almost go without saying, but obviously I need to say that by what's come up in the comments. So I'm talking about otherwise healthy relationships that just need some work, and albeit it might be a lot of work. At the same time, we have so many great resources these days. I encourage you to read books and listen to podcasts. There's so much more available these days that wasn't over a decade ago when I was going through these really tough times, or we were. And again, you need to be judicious and discern, that is, the books and who you're listening to. Do they have similar goals, objectives, and values as you? Because even what can appear as help books, help podcasts may actually similar to the counselors, because they're often reading a lot of the same things too, can be pointing you in a direction that you don't want to go. So it's imperative you have to know where you want to go. Whether you're going to a counselor or not, write out that statement to yourself. What is it that you want to overcome and resolve? And it cannot involve changing another person, okay? It has to be For example, I want to learn how to communicate with my husband and better so that I actually see that he's listening and he's actually concerned about what I'm talking about. Now, that would imply that you have to learn how to communicate to him in a way that he would, and he has that capacity, I would assume, because you've achieved that prior in your relationship. Okay, I'm already 10 minutes in, and that's a good thing I only have 2 points here. So that's really number one. I feel like I want to summarize it again, but you can re-listen to it. I have notes below as well. Number two, I want to clarify and emphasize that even though you may be acquiescing, and acquiescing, just to define it, because I wanted to look it up too, it means you're reluctantly agreeing, okay? So what that does is it kind of dissolves that contention, right? That being an issue for the two of you, and you can't hold it over his head or have that as a point of contention between the two of you. So I'm deliberately using the word acquiesce, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, I think it's important to be clear on definitions. So it's absolutely imperative that you keep talking, okay? And this is probably more for the guys. I think what really saved our marriage was 2 things. My husband is adamant. He's an excellent communicator. And even when things were rough, he pushes to communicate. And I'm the opposite. I tend to be more avoidant and would rather just be like, leave it alone. I don't want to talk. Which I hear is more of a trait or characteristic of men where, they might just want to go to their man cave and just, give up talking. And so it is imperative that you keep on talking, even if you're not going to counseling. And I really, especially if you're going through a rough patch, you probably need to schedule talking to each other, no matter how difficult it's going to be. I would only do an hour maximum and have a clear goal of what you want to achieve and only address one thing at a time. Now, if you have a huge issue, and a huge issue, I mean, it might be one topic that just is attached to so many other things. You might occasionally need to schedule like a 3-hour window just so you have time to let it expand and then hopefully deflate a bit so that you're both not going into your days or coming out of your day and into a session with this huge issue that will have the likelihood of exploding because it doesn't have the time and space to be worked on. But so that might be a particular thing to consider. But also what will more likely be the case is you need at least once a week, an hour to sit down together to address one issue. And what you'll need to do is write down on a piece of paper and agree what that one issue is and agree to come to some sort of solution. And what you'll probably want to do also is by 20 or 30 minutes in max, start working on the solution. So the first 20 or 30 minutes is talking about what the actual issue is. And then the next 30 to 40 minutes is coming up with solutions. And rather than going back and forth on this is a solution, this is not a solution, just write down all the potential solutions, whether you like them or not. And then towards the end, sort it out and try to come to a solution that you both can work with, because it's usually if you're already having an issue, there's not a clear solution that you both can agree on readily. So you're probably each going to have to compromise a bit. And that's not a swear word, okay? So I skipped over a few things, but these are just as important while you're talking, is to use only I language. Now, if you've been to counseling, you already know this, but you really have to even write it on the piece of paper, right? Along with your objective, what is the one issue you're going to address, your start and stop time. Also to commit to only using I language. So instead of blaming the other person, you did this, you did that, this is what I think of you, that's a way to turn around the I statement onto you, right? Just absolutely refuse to point fingers or to use you statements and bring it all to I, and take accountability for yourself. It's going to be tough, but I'll tell you what, not addressing it will blow up and will be way more difficult to deal with. Another thing is pay attention, just notice the difference at the times when you or your spouse is using I think or I feel language. Now, men typically use I think, and women typically use the term I feel. And it's just important to notice because they're both helpful at different times and they're both really can be difficult to hear at other times. So if you just notice and observe when and who is using the I think and I feel, it's just something helpful to note. So ladies, for example, if he says, well, I think this is what is happening, he's laying out what he is seeing and observing. But if you say, I feel this is what is happening, that's how the situation is making you feel. And that's where a lot of miscommunication can happen, where his statement is more matter-of-factual. Yours is just as real to you because that is how you feel, but it's not something that he can relate to. And so sometimes, especially when you're really in the thick of it, it is important to deliberately use I think and I feel. And I would offer to the guys, maybe sometimes saying, I hear that you're saying it makes you feel this way, just to acknowledge it. And ladies, to acknowledge and to recognize when he's saying, I think, that take that into perspective that he's typically really observing something that in his perspective is actually happening. And that can actually really provide insight as well. There's a lot more that you could go on each of those topics, quite a while, but I think many people have already been to counseling, are familiar with those concepts. The main thing is sticking to them, which can be really difficult, especially if you're taking this journey on your own without a mediator. So again, it's worth reiterating that, when you marry, the two become one. Okay. And so it's no longer about just you. You is the two of you. And so it's important to recognize that if you're just fighting for what you want, you're inevitably separating. You're just by default, by definition, you're separating. And so while it's important, we do need to communicate and be heard. The focus needs to be on what is good for the marriage, because usually that involves family, and the family is at least the two of you, which is very important because you affect so many around you. And oftentimes there are children and work and so many things attached to that relationship. So when you consider and revisit that a marriage is actually the two becoming one, and that the priority of the marriage is number one, if in your life you don't consider God being number one, that this will help put things into perspective. And that when he's shutting down is not saying anything, it's because he's not feeling heard, or he has observed in the past when he says stuff, he's not being heard. And so why say something anyways? And because she won't listen, right? And you ladies are trying to be heard as well, but he's not. You're both feeling like you're not being heard, but it is, you perceive it so differently. We do, and it's really absolutely amazing in a way that we can both not feel heard and feel blamed. But we perceive it and take it so differently. So just strive to get back on the same page. And what is a bigger goal, bigger objective of your marriage? And that can help. So, okay, I'm glad I got that off my chest, that number one, I'm not across the board against counseling, but you do have to go into it with eyes wide open. And just like any tool, you have to know how you want to use it and what you want to get out of it. Because if you use it inappropriately, the tool doesn't usually have, a counselor has their own agency and can decide what they want to do. But a lot of times, I've heard and experienced, a lot of counselors will go go where you want to go. And that's great in the sense because you are hiring them, but you want to know, are you hiring them just to agree with you, or are you hiring them to help you? And a lot of times help, like a chisel is a tool, means cutting off those rough edges and those rough corners, even when it feels difficult. And hopefully you do find a good counselor that will be honest with you when it really matters like that, and not just be acquiescing to your feelings and thoughts. So number one, I just wanted to make sure that you know that even though in previous podcasts it might have sounded like I was not for counseling, take that with a big grain of salt. And number two, even if you do acquiesce to not going to counseling together and sort things out on your own, is absolutely imperative that you communicate regularly together. And last but not least, because we definitely learned from this in our own marriage, the more difficult it feels like it is to talk about something, the more important it is to actually talk about. Because if you don't talk about it and you feel like, for example, we had the experience of we thought we were protecting each other by not going into certain directions, it ended up building up and exploding. And you definitely don't want that to happen. So make sure, and that might be your 3-hour session. You might need to, your first one might need to be that 3-hour session just to really get everything out on the table. And then from there, it's like that big puzzle that you're doing. You get everything out on the table, and then you start trying to sort things out. That may be what you need to do as well. But do address those very difficult things as well, because they will eventually come up. Okay, so hopefully, well, I'm sure there'll be a lot more to talk about this someday, but do please like, subscribe, share with someone that you think that came to mind that you think this will be helpful for, and love to hear what you have to say in the comments. Guys, ladies, I know there'll be plenty to say, as there has been on this topic, but it's so important. And so many times you hear in podcasts and so forth that you have to communicate, and it's such a repetitive comment that it sounds cheesy these days. But I want to get into the specifics like we just did and really get to the meat of it to help you out there. Okay, so take care, everybody. If you do need help getting into the details or where to go next, if that just seems like a lot to address, you can contact me and I'll help you get to the next step. Down below, you'll see where you can schedule a consultation and some coaching. What else? Oh, there's also a tip jar. So if you appreciate this content, you can leave a tip there, and I can take my best buddy, that's my hubby, out to coffee or lunch or a dinner. And special thank you for that in advance. And have a wonderful day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.